Hi, I'm David Johnson, and this is Verse by Verse. Virtually anyone in the Western world has heard of the 10 Commandments, though surveys have shown that most people couldn't name all 10. If people were given a jumbled list of the 10, they couldn't put them in the correct order. Worst of all, there are many religious people, or at least they think of themselves as religious, who believe the 10 Commandments are no longer in force. Why would they believe that? It's actually based on a misunderstanding of a verse in the King James translation, and that verse is the subject of today's episode. Here's what the Old King James Bible says in 1 Timothy 1 and verse 5. Now the end of the commandment is charity, out of a pure heart, and of a good conscience, and of faith unfeigned. Doesn't that say that as long as we have charity, which was the old King James word for love, that the commandment has ended for us? Was John Lennon right? All we need is love? Let's break this down a bit and see if that's really what the Apostle Paul was saying. When the King James Version of the Bible was published in 1611, it was seen as a wonderful step forward in making God's Word accessible to more people. Many people think it was written in the common language of people who lived in 1611, but that's incorrect. Since this translation would be read aloud in church services, the translators were told that they should choose the most majestic-sounding words. They decided it would be more majestic if they translated it into the way people spoke in the 1400s. The King James Version certainly sounds majestic when read aloud, but majestic doesn't always mean understandable. In the passage we're considering, virtually every modern translation replaces the word end with words like goal or purpose or end result. Here's what the New King James Version says. Now the purpose of the commandment is love from a pure heart, from a good conscience, and from sincere faith. The New International Version says the goal of this command is love, which comes from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. The English Standard Version says the aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. The actual word the King James translators found in their Greek manuscripts is telos, and telos normally refers to the goal or outcome of some particular effort. Thayer's Greek lexicon describes it this way: consummation, the end goal, purpose, such as closure with all its results. One of the more modern Greek lexicons says intent, goal, the purpose of an event or state viewed in terms of its result. Paul was certainly not telling his readers that any of God's commandments were invalid and unnecessary, that the need for obedience had ended. He was saying that the commandments were designed to produce godly love, a heart that's pure and free from selfish motives, a clear conscience, and a genuine and sustaining faith. The Apostle John said much the same thing in 1 John 5, verse 3, where he wrote, "For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome." It is true that in Jesus' day the religious leaders had added so many do's and don'ts to the commandments that obeying them had become oppressive. But that's not the way they were instituted by God, and Jesus himself chided those religious leaders for making God's way seem burdensome. Those religious leaders are gone, but their ideas about God's law are still alive, clouding people's understanding today. For example, when I was growing up, the church I attended taught me that keeping the seventh-day Sabbath was a burdensome and unpleasant requirement from the Old Testament, and that Jesus had come and released us from that burden. They didn't seem to think any of the other commandments were too restrictive, but they made a point of saying that we don't need to keep the Sabbath anymore. When I learned that God still expects us to keep that command, I just knew I would never enjoy a Saturday again. It took me a little while, but over time, I learned that what I had been taught about the Sabbath was completely wrong. The weekly Sabbath is not a burden. It's the most unburdened day of the entire week. I came to understand what the Apostle James meant when he twice referred to God's commandments as the law of liberty. Would you like to learn more about this amazing and liberating code of conduct? Check out our free booklet, God's 10 Commandments, still relevant today. You'll find a link in the show notes.
Verse by Verse is a Life, Hope, and Truth podcast. Check out the show notes to find more free content, like videos, articles, and booklets in our Learning Center.